Hi, Michael M. Middleton here, and if you saw the video previous to this, adverse conditions precipitated a move. And if you didn't get that, you need to work on your vocabulary. I said precipitated. Anyway, I wanted to, even if I got to shelter my car here for a bit, continue on with another video or two today from my allegorical fiction novel, The Great Deep. Don't know if I get that all in there or not. And if this is the first video you're running across, I'll let you pause and read the back to get a general overview. And know that you can follow this link to my YouTube channel and the playlist Good Books and see the other videos there. So I'm hoping that this setup's going to work and that the microphone will catch me. I'm not sure where the microphone is on this, so I'm not sure if I'm blocking it or not. But hopefully this will work. I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 10. William awoke with a start. Shaken and confused, he shot up and spun around in a daze. Locating the source of the zealous clamor that had wakened him, he gradually came to his senses. Reaching over to the nightstand, he shut off the meddlesome alarm clock. His heart racing, he surveyed the room. For a moment, his mind was a void. Then, the memory of the dream suddenly invaded his consciousness. The intensely vivid imagery overwhelmed him briefly, and he had to brace himself against the nightstand. He'd had vivid dreams before, but this was the first time that he'd ever felt awake, consciously aware, inside the dream. The duplicity of the experience both startled and fascinated him. The strange mixture of conflicting emotions and impulses was something akin to what tornado chasers must experience. William pondered the bizarre vision as he paced the bathroom and began to prepare for the day. Inexplicably, he knew that there was something different about this dream, that this dream was something more than just a dream. It was more than just random thoughts or unconscious emotions ricocheting around behind his eyeballs as he slept. William somehow knew that this dream had another source, a source outside of himself. And it had meaning. He knew that this dream had meaning and purpose. It was a vessel of revelation. Driving the car meant control. Having control of his own life, his own decisions, his own future. The road he traveled was dry and dusty and the landscape barren. Still, what had been important to William was that he was the one driving, the one in control. Then, he had suddenly lost that control, or had he never really had it? Whichever the case, William had found himself no longer in control of his own fate. He careened into the unknown, fighting it every inch of the way, overcome with fear. Then, when the terrifying descent down the hill had come to a merciful end, he became aware of something new, something beautiful in the distance. He deeply yearned for whatever it was, yet he was afraid of it at the same time. Whatever it was, he knew that it was beyond him, beyond his ability to receive and experience. He felt as if the beautiful thing in the distance would certainly overwhelm and destroy him, at least in his present state. Yet he also somehow knew that whatever it was necessary, vital to his existence, and yet fear and shame kept him from it. He did not have the courage to resolve within himself to journey across the desolate landscape in pursuit of that beautiful oasis beyond. It was at this point that he had become aware of a presence both benevolent and terrifyingly resolute. In this presence, William had sensed both a fiery compassion and an unyielding determination that would not yield to his insecurity and would not be swayed by his fear. Although he could sense compassion in this presence unlike any he had ever known, William had still become filled with terror as this presence began carrying him towards the lake. He was truly divided within himself. Yes, he knew that he could, or at least should, trust the one carrying him. But if this one really did love him, how could he be carrying him towards something that filled him with such fear? "It is because I love you," a voice from within him seemed to say. "Holiness is more important than happiness." This thought leapt suddenly into William's mind, catching him off guard in the middle of brushing his teeth. He froze in mid-stroke with the toothbrush sticking out of the side of his mouth. He attempted to wrap his mind around this profound thought while staring down at the bathroom sink. He did begin to understand the concept, but only a mite. William knew that there was a much bigger revelation contained in these words than he could understand at that time. But a tiny spark now ignited within him. With time, that spark would grow. Over the coming months and years and decades, this spark would birth a flame, and that flame would become an all-consuming fire. The sensation of toothpaste-laden drool streaming across his cheek shook William from this torpor. He finished brushing his teeth and laid the toothbrush aside, before splashing cold water onto his face. He then quickly dressed and made his way to the utility room. Strapping on his boots, William slipped out the back door and across the yard. Making short work of feeding the chickens, he collected the eggs before returning to the kitchen. He decided on a stack of oatmeal raisin cookies and a glass of milk for breakfast. Oatmeal and fruit, he thought. That's breakfast food. As he finished off the last of his milk, William glanced down at his grandma's Bible, which lay open on the table. Highlighted in orange, he read, "Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths." Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. William drained the last drop of milk and set the empty glass in the sink. Just then, his dad entered the kitchen to refill his coffee cup. "Good morning, son," Jacob began. What's my boy up to today?" "Oh, hi, Dad," William replied. "I'm heading back out to the cave. I'll probably be gone most of the day." "Are you planning on making it back for lunch?" Jacob asked. William replied, "Nah, I've got some snacks and stuff in my backpack. I'll be fine." "Are you taking some extra water along?" Jacob inquired. "It's supposed to get pretty hot today." Oh yeah, I saw a canteen hanging in the utility room," William replied. "I'll fill it up and take it along." "Okay, sport, have fun," Jacob said. "I'll see you at dinner." William paced back to the utility room and found the old canteen. He carried it to the mop sink and filled it up with cold water. As he turned to retrieve his backpack, Jacob called out, "Oh, don't forget. I want to take you fishing down at the river sometime this week." William glanced back and nodded in agreement as he stepped through the back door. Glancing over at his bicycle, his face suddenly fell. The back tire was flat. Upon closer examination, he could see a length of heavy baling wire protruding from it. "Oh, man," he exclaimed. "What's wrong, boy?" Mary asked as she rounded the corner of the house. Glancing down at the tire, she concluded, "Oh, flat tire, eh?" William scowled. "I was going to head out to the cave today, but I don't want to walk all that way with this." He dropped the backpack and canteen next to his disabled bicycle. "Well, honey, your mom's headed into town later on," Mary replied. "I'll see if she can pick you up a spare tube and a patch kit." "You do have a tire pump, don't you?" she asked. "If not, I'll have her—" "Well, yeah, but what about today?" William interrupted. "I really wanted to get back out to the cave today." Mary thought for a moment and then suggested, "Well, why don't you take Chester? I taught you how to ride last summer, didn't I?" "Chester," William hesitantly replied. I don't know." "Ah, come on. You did great on him last summer," Mary encouraged. "It's in your blood, boy, and you know Chester's a good horse. He won't stampede on you. Just be sure to tie him up so you don't walk home on your own while poking around in the cave." So he don't walk home on his own while you're poking around in the cave. With Longmont carrying the heavy backpack and canteen as his only alternative, William finally relinquished his objections. "Well, okay, I guess," he sighed. "Will you help me get him ready?" "Sure, follow me," Mary replied. She whistled to Chester, who was plodding across the middle of the pasture. The horse's ears perked up, and he obediently trotted over to Mary, who opened the gate to let him through. She then closed the gate and took hold of Chester's bridle, leading him to the horse barn. William retrieved his backpack and canteen and followed along behind. He had a little trouble keeping up with their brisk pace and reached the barn a couple of dozen paces after they had arrived. Pardon the book going back and forth. I'm shuffling behind the steering wheel here. Following Mary's instructions, William saddled Chester and clipped a set of reins onto the horse's bridle. Mary double-checked the saddle straps. "Very good, boy," she said. "You learn quickly. Now you be sure to let him get a good drink before you head out. It's going to be a hot one today. And try to tie him up in some shade if you can," she concluded. "I think there's still a couple of big trees not too far from the fort." "Okay, Grandma, thanks," William said as he placed his left foot in the stirrup and swung up onto Chester's back. He steadied himself and took hold of the reins. Mary handed him his backpack and he strapped it on. She then hung the old canteen from the saddle horn, triple wrapping the strap so it wouldn't swing around too much. "You remember how to steer this animal?" she asked. "Yeah, it's coming back to me," William replied. "Thanks again, Grandma. I'll be home around dinner time." On her way back to the house, Mary opened the gate and the fence again, allowing the horse and his somewhat hesitant rider to pass through. William then allowed the horse to drink his fill of water from the trough just inside the fence before they set off across the pasture. Wanting to finally get a look at the blowhole on his way back to the cave, William steered Chester in that direction. When they arrived, William did not find what he'd expected. There was no trace of fertilizer in the immediate area around the blowhole. All that he saw was a nearly perfectly circular spot of very low grass about 10 feet across, dotted with wildflowers. And in the middle, nearly hidden by the foliage, a circular hole about 8 inches or so in diameter. It would have been a dangerous pitfall but for the constant breeze rising from it, which made it difficult to miss. Even from his perch atop Chester, William could feel the cool air wafting up from the depths. There was a hint of sweetness in the air, which William assumed must be from the wildflowers. "I can see why the cows like this spot," he thought, "but I don't understand why. How come it's so green here, just in this spot?" He thought for a moment, then finally decided that there must be an underground spring seeping up to the surface in this spot, maybe. "I bet it seeps up through the cracks around the blowhole," he thought. Back to something he'd read in the book about caves he bought in the mall and concluded, "Yeah, that must be it." William carefully stepped down off of Chester and located a rock about the size of a golf ball. Poised above the dark void, he held the stone captive. Cocking his ear to one side, he loosened his grip and began counting. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 He was disappointed when he heard the stone strike bottom in a little less than 3 seconds. He was hoping it was deeper than that. His curiosity satiated, William climbed back aboard Chester and prompted him in the direction of the cave. With the exception of the area around the blowhole, the pasture was already beginning to dry out for the summer, and Chester kicked up a good deal of dust as he walked along. Soon, the man who leased the pasture from Mary would have to start running the irrigation lines, which were stacked up next to the pond. William was eager to explore the cave and was beginning to become impatient with the horse's leisurely pace. However, the memory of his recent experience with the cactus was still quite fresh in his mind. He dreaded the thought of falling from the horse and landing on cactus again. Thus, he decided to play it safe and allow the horse to continually lazily sauntering along. Before long, they had made their way to the spot where the trail began to ascend the distant hill. Chester continued a steady pace as the trail wound its way up the hill and down the other side. After a stretch and a yawn, he led Chester to a shady spot under a large oak tree, some distance past where the eastern slope of the hill trailed off to level ground again. William then took a lead rope from the saddlebag. After clipping one end to the horse's bridle, he tied it off to a low branch of the oak tree. Retrieving the canteen, he poured a little water into a cupped hand and rubbed it onto Chester's nose to help him cool off. The horse snorted in appreciation. Next, he adjusted the straps of his backpack and then hung the canteen from his shoulder as he stepped off in the direction of the cave. He covered the distance in just a few moments' time. Pausing slightly at the cave's mouth, he adjusted the backpack again before beginning his descent. The sun had climbed well into the morning sky, and a good deal of light spilled down in over the rough slope and across the floor of the cave. He did not need to pause to allow his eyes to adjust this time. However, he did pause for a moment when he reached the bottom of the slope in order to reacquaint himself with his surroundings. He then paced over to the far left corner of the cave, setting the backpack and canteen next to the large crack in the wall. He scanned the wall for a moment before opening the top of the backpack. Rummaging through the contents, William retrieved the hammer and a stick of white chalk. He began tapping on the wall in front of him with the hammer, attempting to determine where it would break through with the least amount of effort. As he tapped on the wall with the heavy hammer, he listened carefully and made marks with the chalk where it sounded the most hollow. When he was confident that he had fairly accurately defined the area where he would concentrate his effort, William stepped back and returned the chalk to his backpack. He had defined an area, roughly oval, about 3 feet across at its widest point. It's a little high, he thought. I don't want rocks falling on my head. I need something to stand on. He set the hammer down and glanced around the cave, spotting the dusty couch first. There was also an old wooden crate which seemed to serve as an end table of sorts. Off to the side a bit stood the card table and several folding chairs. He paced over to the subterranean living room in order to more closely examine his prospects. The crate looked too fragile to hold his weight. One of the chairs might hold him, but then again it might not. It could suddenly collapse on him, or he could lose his balance and fall. Obviously, the rickety old card table wasn't even a consideration. I guess it's the couch, he said aloud. With a great deal of effort, he walked over to the old couch across the cave floor. He alternately lifted the opposite ends of the couch into the air, swinging them this way and that, until he had successfully transported the dusty old beast into proper alignment with the back wall of the cave. Sipping a little water from his canteen, William took a moment to catch his breath before continuing. He then retrieved the hammer and a heavy chisel from his backpack. He balanced himself on the front edge of the couch and went to work. The stone was somewhat softer than he thought that it would be, and he had soon circumscribed the area defined by the chalk marks. He made his way around the oval several more times, deepening the chisel groove a little more with each orbit. Finally, William felt as if he must be nearly through. He tossed the chisel off to the side. Making sure of his balance, he grasped the hammer with both hands. With all the force his nearly 12-year-old frame could muster, he raised the hammer high over his head and brought it crashing down on the stone wall in front of him. The outcome of this action was not exactly what he'd hoped for, as the stone refused to give way. Instead, the force of the recoil sent William tumbling over the back of the couch. Having been lucky to avoid any serious injury, he retrieved the hammer from where it had flown and returned to his perch. I'm sure glad Sharon wasn't here to see that, he thought, as he braced one hand against the cave wall. Okay, plan B. Instead of trying to break his way through with one mighty blow, he now steadied himself with one hand while swinging the hammer with the other. At first, there was no visual indication that his effort was doing any good. However, he somehow sensed that he was making progress. After several strokes, the sound of the hammer falling against the stone seemed to change somehow. Soon after, 2 large cracks appeared. A few more strokes sent smaller cracks fleeing in all directions. And finally, the stone gave way and a small hole appeared near the middle of his designated passageway. Energized by this small success, William made short work of completing his oval portal into the underworld. He stepped down and returned the hammer and chisel to his backpack. He then retrieved his flashlight and stepped back onto the couch. Grasping the flashlight in his right hand, he turned it on, its beam invading the mysterious beyond. He extended the flashlight through the opening and peered in. What he saw was another room, roughly the size of the one that he was in, but the hole he peered through was only about a foot below the level of the ceiling in the next cavern. The floor was a dozen feet or more below him and appeared to slope quite steeply downhill as it neared the back wall. A few rocks and small boulders were scattered here and there. As the hungry beam consumed the darkness, William suddenly heard a scampering sound off to his right. He quickly flashed the beam in that direction and caught a glimpse of movement. He scanned the ceiling, the walls, the floor. Just as the beam bathed a particular boulder in white light, he saw movement again. Something had ducked behind that large rock. Too excited to be afraid, William jumped down off the couch. He quickly retrieved his backpack and canteen. After pulling a length of rope from the backpack, he tied it off to one of the couch's heavy wooden legs. He then tied the other end of the rope to the canteen strap and slowly lowered it through the hole and to the floor of the cave below. Zipping the backpack closed, he dropped it through the hole as well. William then inserted the flashlight into one of his pockets and mentally prepared for the task ahead. Bracing both hands on the edge of the portal, he swung one leg up and through the opening. Just like getting on a horse, he thought. Firmly gripping the rope, he swung his other leg through the hole and began lowering himself to the cave floor below. As soon as his feet were steady on the cave floor, William quickly pulled the flashlight from his pocket and ignited the beam once again. He caught his bearings and flashed the beam in the direction of the large rock where he had seen the movement. Slowly he crept forward until he was within about 8 feet. He then pivoted around the stone in one quick motion, igniting the backside. Nothing. Whatever it was that had been there was gone. Nuts. Slowly surveying the rest of the cave, William strained at the silence. In the middle of the left wall, a crack opened. He assumed that it must be a continuation of the crevice from the room above where he had thought that he had heard music. As he looked closer, there appeared to be a series of regular flat shapes sloping uphill, hidden within the crevice. The shapes were very regular and very even. Like a staircase, William thought. Now that's weird. He swung the beam back to the opposite wall. In the far corner, there appeared to be an opening, a passageway leading farther back into the earth. He lifted the flashlight over his head, vainly attempting to see farther down this new passageway. But his current position would not allow this. He decided to walk over and check out the passageway first to see how far back it looked like it went. If it looked interesting enough to warrant investigation in depth, he would return for his backpack, or at least for a piece of chalk, to mark his way so he didn't get lost. As William began to carefully pick his way across the steep slope leading towards the back wall of the cave, he suddenly heard the scampering sound again. It was coming from behind him now. He hesitated slightly before spinning around, launching the beam in the direction of the sound. What he saw, he could not believe. There, frozen in the flashlight's beam, was the strangest and most frightening thing he had ever seen. About 6 feet behind him, atop a large stone, stood a kangaroo rat about the same size as the one he had seen in the kitchen. That was not the strange part, however. A creature of that size could easily scamper through the crevice on the far wall, and it would not be unusual for them to use underground places of this sort as nest sites. But this particular rodent was also wearing a saddle. It looked nearly identical to the one the kangaroo rat in the kitchen had worn. And beside the saddled rodent stood, William did not know what it was. Next to the kangaroo rat, holding a tiny set of reins and obviously paralyzed with fear, stood what vaguely looked like a little person. He, or it, was humanoid in form, but quite different in appearance. Roughly 8 inches tall, it stood upright with arms and legs that were somewhat spider-like, very slender and slightly longer in proportion to its body than a human's. The creature was wearing clothing of a sort, but what skin William could see appeared to be a light shade of gray. A neat tuft of white hair crowned the creature's head, and its eyes looked somewhat oversized. As William stood there, he took one very hesitant step in the creature's direction, and the mutual spell was suddenly broken. The gray creature deftly leapt aboard the kangaroo rat, which sprung into motion like an auburn bolt of lightning. It was obviously making a beeline for the crevice on the left-hand wall. Abandoning all sense of caution, William sped off across the floor in pursuit of the tiny rider. He just barely managed to cut in front of the kangaroo rat, blocking the creature's escape. In one smooth motion, the rodent and his rider wheeled around and sped off towards the opening in the opposite wall. William chased after them again and might have caught up. However, about halfway across the cavern, the rat suddenly stopped and spun around. The tiny creature on its back raised a hand into the air. There, in the depths of the earth, in a place of darkness, there suddenly exploded a fiery brilliance. A luminosity unmatched by 1,000 suns instantly blinded William, and he felt as if his whole being were dissolving, being infused into something far beyond himself. That light, that horrible, wonderful light. Every muscle in his body went limp in that instant, and yet the inertia of his pursuit carried William forward. He fell, striking the floor with a horrendous force. As the dreadful light had blinded his eyes, now breaking bones and tearing flesh laid siege to his mind. As William tumbled down the steep slope, blinded with pain, his head finally struck the back wall of the cave, and then all was black.